Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes as people continue to join. Thank you. All right, we've got a great group today. Um, we can get started. I will let people continue to join, but first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I really enjoy talking about estate planning and just preparing for the rest of your life, as well as for those loved ones that when you're gone, will be looking at your estate. And I think it's just a really important topic that isn't the most fun to talk about, but is so necessary as we continue to move through life, accumulate wealth. What are we going to do with that? So estate planning basics, something really close to my heart, and I am really happy to see so many people who are interested in having that conversation. So thank you. So today we're going to talk about basics of estate planning, but also we're going to talk about, do you have a plan? Do you need one? Essentials that give you a good head start in estate planning. Just getting started today, a couple deliverables that are very small action items you can take anytime to begin the process of preparing your estate plan. So with that said, let's begin. And Bryant is joining me today, and he will be doing the slides. Thank you for that, Bryant. I just want to mention if there are questions that you have as we're moving through the slides, you should be able to put those in the chat where people will see your questions, or you can send it in the Q&A, which is limited to just myself and Bryant seeing your questions. You can make those anonymous there as well. So please feel free to ask questions in any format you prefer. And if I don't get to your questions in real time, I will get to them at the end. I'll try to do them as we're moving through, but we'll just see how many questions we get. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what types of estate plans there are. This isn't going to cover the gamut of all estate planning types. It can be very complicated. I'm not an attorney, so we're just going to be talking about the basics. I'm also going to give you enough information that when you leave this workshop, you can have that conversation with your loved ones, with your family, with your friends, and also with an estate attorney if that's what you decide to do. We're going to talk about things you'll find in an estate plan and other considerations that you can consider in taking care of yourself and your family, and a few steps to start. Okay, so with that said, let's move right into it. So why should I create a plan? Well, you're all here because you think you probably should create a plan, or maybe you're thinking about changing your plan, or you just don't even really know where to start. There's a lot of places we're all coming from in this conversation. I first would say that it's not just about what happens when you're gone, but it's also about what happens when you're still alive. So even though we think of estate planning as what happens to our assets when we're gone, it can also involve how we manage our assets now. as well as our health, financial decisions, and just having a plan for if something happens to us, but we're, let's say, incapacitated. How do we maneuver through that, and how do our loved ones know what to do? So estate plans are where we direct things to go for the future, but also for now. We can make it easier for our heirs and loved ones when we say exactly what we want. And we do that with a clear mind, clear head. We know we're coming from a place of clarity, calmness. We're not feeling pressured. We're not feeling stressed. It's always better to plan for the worst or the unexpected when we're not in the moment of stress and fear and anxiety. So doing this while you're feeling good about things, or maybe you're not, but you're anticipating that this is the best time, the here and now, to have those conversations. So creating an estate plan is important for our loved ones. It's important also if we have specific things we want to do with our money or assets when we're gone that maybe don't involve our heirs. We can direct funds elsewhere. Sometimes that can look like donating to a charitable trust or to a nonprofit that's near and dear to us. That's not necessarily going to happen unless you direct it to do for your money to go there. We can also protect vulnerable loved ones. So estate planning gives us a plan or a guide potentially for appointing a physical guardian for minor children or dependents, or a financial guardian, since minors cannot directly inherit money or assets. We can help heirs avoid costly probate or the uncertainty of not knowing what our wishes were or where to start in figuring out where money is. So estate planning doesn't necessarily need to be super fancy. It can be just telling your family, loved ones, where your assets are in case something happens, so that they know where to go. It can help us to know, kind of think about what we value. I think that a lot of times when we're moving through life, we're so busy with the day to day that we don't always evaluate, what do I value? Where do I want my money going? We think about it in terms of a spending plan, like where do we want our money going? Where do we value our money going? But we don't necessarily think about it big picture. So it gives you a chance to kind of stop and evaluate what's happening now that you like, and maybe things that you would like to change. It also is a blueprint, and I really like to think of your estate plan as a blueprint to anyone who looks at it to know what you want, what your intentions are. And estate plans also can help us while we're still here. It depends on the type of estate plan, and we'll talk about that. But with a trust, for example, you can put assets in that and then manage them while you're still alive. If it's a living trust, again, we'll talk about that shortly. But you can also think about how you would want things to go in the case of a medical emergency for you, how you would want your medical care to go, what that looks like for you. If something happens, you're incapacitated, and someone needs to take over your financial life for a brief period of time, or maybe indefinitely, who that would be and what that would look like as well. You get to choose that. That's really empowering, because a lot of times we don't like to think about what could happen. We just say, well, it's not going to happen, it can't happen, but it does happen. And actually, there's some statistics I looked up to have this conversation. It might be a little sobering, but 1 in 3 Americans will face at least a 90-day disability before reaching the age of 65. So 1 in 3. I can attest to that. I have had a short-term disability before, and that happened in my early 30s. So it does happen. I'm that 1 in 3. And according to another study, up to 44% of Americans will face a disability of up to 4.7 years. So you may have heard of people who intended to retire later, but something happened and they retired sooner. Sometimes that happens. So we kind of hope for the best, but we should expect the worst, because then we're prepared for any situation. So if someone depends on your income, you need an estate plan. If you have assets or accounts in your name, you need an estate plan. If you could be injured or unable to manage your finances or health decisions at any time, you need an estate plan. I think I might be covering everyone. Luckily, these are easier than ever to get. There are great options online. There's affordable estate planning attorneys. There's a lot of do it yourself. There's a lot of options out there that are very affordable for any price point. Even naming beneficiaries on your accounts is a great place to start. That is estate planning, and we'll talk about that as well. Another thing is that some employers offer legal insurance, so that is a great way to get some estate planning done in a really affordable way if your employer offers that. Okay, so terms to know, we're going to move on to a little bit of lingo or jargon that you might need to know in order to kind of understand some of the things we'll talk about. You may be very familiar with this, but if you're not, I just want to briefly go over some of these terms. So estate planning can look like a lot of things, but generally when people think of estate planning, they're thinking of trusts and wills. So I want to talk a little bit about those and the differences. Again, talk to an attorney if you aren't sure what's right for you, or if you have any specific legal questions relating to any of these terms or any of the topics we discuss. So a trust is a legal arrangement where a person or people give another person or people the right to hold and use property for the benefit of a beneficiary. So when we think about a trust, there's someone who opens the trust, and they are called the trustor. They grant authority to a trustee. It's often them. They are granting as trustor themselves as the trustee, or co-trustees like themselves and a partner, spouse, or family member. And that is often how it is in a living revocable trust. We're going to talk about that shortly. But the idea behind a trust is that you're now creating an entity that can then have assets put into it. So when you think of a trust, it's simply a place to then put things into. And it is something that exists and can be changed, modified, or dissolved. Okay, so that's a trust. They're created under state law. So when you're working with an attorney on a trust, it's going to depend on state law, and they are the experts on telling you what that looks like. They can help you manage assets while you're still alive, because they're providing instructions on how to transfer ownership, depending on how you set the trust language up. It's pretty flexible, so attorneys can very much help you with that. And the idea too is that because it is a living entity while you're alive, you can do things with it, not just for after you pass away, but for things that you would like to do while you're living to manage your assets in a way that makes sense for you. A will, now this gives instructions on how to distribute your property after death only. It is not an entity, it does not create an entity, and nothing happens with a will until you pass away. So that is a huge distinction between the two. We're going to delve into a little bit more of the differences there, but a will is an instruction of how you want your estate dispersed upon death. So that is kind of the big difference. There's more differences, but we'll talk about that. One thing I'll note is that with a trust, because it's a private document, the transfer of assets happens within the trust. It's not public record. It doesn't go through courts or probate. With a will, you do go through probate, you do go through the public court system, and that can take time, money, etc. But that just depends on, what your goals are for an estate plan. And I think that it can look different in different parts of your life. You can start with updating beneficiaries on your accounts. You can eventually have a will. Maybe you eventually want to have a trust, or anything in between. Power of attorney. So this is specifically durable power of attorney is where you're giving somebody the authority to make decisions on your behalf if you become incapacitated. And the power of attorney, which is generally a financial power of attorney, allows somebody to be able to be you essentially on your bank accounts, your real estate, your financial picture, according to how you assign POA language, and your attorney can help you with that. So this can sometimes come in handy. I've seen it when people deploy in the military. They may assign a durable power of attorney for financial purposes to manage their affairs when they're gone. Sometimes it's their spouse, sometimes it's someone else. And it can also be open-ended and part of an estate plan where you say, if this happens to me, then this person can do these things. But once I am able to act on my behalf again, I remove that access. So there's a lot of rules you can put around that. Advanced directive or living will, this is the medical version of that. So this is, and there is also a power of attorney for health choices as well. And so what that looks like is you talk about what it is that you would want in the case of, various situations happening to you medically. You say it in advance when you're feeling like you know exactly what you want, so that when that time comes, people know your wishes. This is a really important thing because, again, we don't like to think about what could happen, but things do happen and they happen quickly. So if you have that living will or advanced directive that tells people your exact wishes, then you don't have to be as worried about the what ifs. Beneficiary and contingent beneficiary. This one you might be more familiar with. You see this when you're signing up for your workplace plan. They want you to put a beneficiary. They want you to put backup beneficiaries. So this is simply a refresher of that. A beneficiary is simply someone who's going to receive your assets in the percentage or amount that you allocate to them. And a contingent beneficiary would be the backup. If that beneficiary is gone or something happens, then the backup contingent beneficiaries will receive this, whatever the asset is in the percentage you allocate. Trustee, co-trustee, and successor trustees and trustor. That's a lot in one bullet. So we did talk a little bit about this already. A trustee, well, let's start with trustor. So the trustor is the person who creates the trust. If there's a trust to create, they're creating it. They will give the ability to manage that trust to a trustee and or a co-trustee. And it can be themselves, it can be others. And then a successor trustee would be the person who, if and when the trustee and co-trustee pass away, the successor trustees step in to allocate the assets of the trust as indicated in the trust. So your successor trustee is somewhat like an executor, except executors are for wills and successor trustees are for trusts. Now, trust can be very complicated, so that's just a very basic definition of those things, but attorneys that are helping you, if you're going to take this path, would be able to give you a lot more information on the specifics of how that would look for you. Finally, revocable living and irrevocable trusts. We'll talk about both. We're going to spend a little more time on revocable because revocable is more common, and it's generally when people are thinking of a trust, that's kind of what they're thinking of. It allows you to make changes in your lifetime. The assets in it still belong to you as long as you're alive, but you've simply outlined how you want things distributed upon your death. Irrevocable are unchangeable, and we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Okay, that was a lot. Let's move on to a couple more differences between wills and trusts. This is just very general, but I really liked this graphic, so I took it from Motley Fool. Thanks, Motley Fool. So wills define beneficiaries, so do trusts. That is kind of what they're meant for in a lot of ways, but that's a little bit where they end. So as I mentioned, trusts, when you set them up, become their own entity. They are usually linked to, if it's a revocable trust, it would be linked to your social security number or that of your co-trustee or your spouse or your family member, whoever else may be a trustee with you, but it still exists separately from you. When you pass away, when your co-trustees pass away, the trust becomes, it can often become irrevocable, and then it gets its own tax ID number. So it is an entity that exists separately from you, whereas a will only exists when you pass away. Well, it exists, but it doesn't, nothing happens with it till you pass away. And it isn't an entity of itself. You can't fund it. You can't put things in it. Things can't be owned by your will. Things can be owned by your trust. So that's a huge difference between the two. A will designates guardian for minor children. So this is something definitely talk to an attorney about. I'm not going to get into this very much, but I just want you to know that if you have minor children, definitely talk about the differences between a will and a trust, or do some research for yourself, because there are pretty big differences. With a trust, you can definitely be a little more granular about what you want to happen, and it's kind of a different process that's followed than a will where the court system is involved. So with that, I would also say that we mentioned this, wills do become part of public record. Trusts generally don't, and most usually don't. So that is one thing that people like about trusts, but trusts are very much more costly than wills. So oftentimes people will start with a will and then decide later if they want to do a trust or not. Trusts aren't for everyone, wills aren't for everyone. It just depends on your personal situation. But this information here will give you the tools to be able to have those conversations with your family and eventually with an attorney if that's what you decide to do. So trusts don't generally go through probate, and wills do. Probate is by state, and it's a court process, and it distributes things even with a will according to what the will wants, but it just takes time. There's also money involved in probate. There's money involved in trust too, but that's more on the front of the front of it, whereas wills are more costly for as you move through probate, which would be after you would pass away. And then I would also say here that wills are fairly easy to prepare even without an attorney. You can go online and find programs that will do wills for you. You can do that with trust too. I think with that, if you're finding some stuff that you think might be legitimate, do some research. It can't hurt to just ask an attorney. You know, you can actually sometimes just do a consultation with an attorney. Those might be free or very cheap, to say, hey, I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I found this program. What are your thoughts? Of course, they're probably going to say, hey, go with me. But I think it's always good to just get second opinions and to also do your research before you sign up for something. Also, if you're not sure if something's legitimate or scammy, financial coaches can help with that. Okay, let's move on to what is an estate plan? We kind of talked about this. We're not going to spend too much time on this slide, but I just wanted to mention here that we did talk a little bit about beneficiaries and accounts. This is where I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. So an estate plan doesn't have to look like a will or trust either. It can look like updating your beneficiary on your accounts. Trusts and wills can often outline things that aren't easy to assign ownership to. So like jewelry, art, trying to think of what other things, like furniture, things that you want to go somewhere, but you can't really assign title to. Those can be outlined in a will or a trust. Trusts usually have a pour over will. So everything that's not outlined in the trust then goes into the will section. So there's ways to do that you can't really update beneficiaries for that, right? So that's where a will can be helpful. But if you're just looking at where you're starting from the beginning and you're like, I don't know where to start, check your beneficiaries on your accounts, your savings, your checking, your retirement, your brokerage. Any accounts that you hold with an institution allow you to update beneficiaries. You can have a primary, you can have multiple primaries depending on the type of account. You can have contingent beneficiaries. That's a really good place to start with estate planning. And the reason that I really like that, and I think it's really accessible, is because you're doing it anyway. And it also, in your mind, you know that money's going there. And with bank accounts with beneficiaries, those can often supersede what's in a trust or will. So it's really important that your beneficiaries are updated and that you know and are happy with who you've listed. I recommend people check their beneficiaries at least twice a year, just to make sure that that's still what they want. It still makes sense, because even I forget who I've listed unless I write it down somewhere. Like, oh, I think it's this, but I don't know. And then I'll go in and say, oh, that's not what I thought it was. I want to update it. And it's very easy these days to do that, usually because you can just go into a platform, sign in, make the updates, and go on your way. The only caveat here would be retirement accounts. Those, depending on your state, may require your spouse to be the beneficiary if you are married. They would have to waive that right explicitly. So that's something to consider when it comes to retirement accounts and thinking about estate planning with that. So again, take a look at your plan, see what's possible, and make the updates according to what works best for you. All right, revocable living trust. So this is a common type of trust, and it does allow you or your co-trustees to make changes while you're alive. The language can restrict certain changes upon the death of a co-trustee or not. This is where you talk to an attorney about what is possible. But it's really kind of the you see trust a lot when people especially have a lot of assets and they start to accumulate a lot of wealth, because it does get complicated as you get, older and older and move into that part of your life, or you start to realize, oh, actually, yeah, I am getting older and I would like a plan. You see that happen more and more. But also wills are very common in all stages of life, even just updating beneficiary accounts. So there's a lot of different ways to go with that. But just remember that with a revocable living trust, that means you can make changes in your life. And revocable means it can be revoked, it can be changed, it can be emptied, funded, liquidated, dissolved, up to you as long as you're the co-trustee. So making changes in this kind of entity with a trust is just as easy as going to your attorney and asking for the changes. Usually it requires notarization and things like that if you're using an online program. Let's see. So let's then move into irrevocable trusts. And Brian, I think we're 2 slides back. So great, thank you. We're not going to talk too much about this. I definitely think that if you have interest in this kind of trust, again, talk to an attorney. But the idea behind an irrevocable trust is that it cannot be changed once you execute it. And oftentimes it takes your what were your assets and put them in an entity, because trusts are entities, that you no longer have access or ownership to those assets. And there's reasons people might want to do that, but that's kind of out of the scope of our conversation today. I just wanted to bring it up because people may want to know about what this is and the difference, because there are very important differences between a revocable and an irrevocable, and you want to make sure that you understand there's 2 kinds. So when you're talking to your attorney, you can ask, what's the difference, and can you tell me a little bit more? Okay. There's one more trust I want to bring up, also a little out of my wheelhouse, but I still want to mention it because if this seems like something that resonates with you, I'd love for you to know about it so that you can have those conversations. And so the next slide talks about special needs trusts. These are often irrevocable. I'm not sure if they're always irrevocable, but if this is something that you think you're interested in, talk to an attorney. This is very much an attorney topic. I wouldn't even really try to do this online. But this is a legal arrangement where a physically or mentally disabled or chronically ill person can receive income from the trust while being eligible for disability or income qualified benefits. If this sounds like something that's relevant to you or to someone in your family or a friend, mention it. They can look into it and figure out if it's relevant for them. I also mentioned here ABLE accounts. Now, ABLE accounts are, they can be part of estate planning. And if you or someone in your family has a disability that began before the age of 26, they may be qualified for an ABLE account. So again, I don't want to give too much information there because it's not really in my wheelhouse, but I want you to know about it because it is really important, if it resonates with you, to be empowered with the knowledge to be able to have those conversations with the relevant people. So if you have any interest in these, I really urge you to seek out that information. Okay. The next slide is just a couple other terms you may hear as you're looking through trust types. these are all either types of trusts or types of arrangements within trusts. And I mention it only so that you know how complicated the trust world can be, but also so that if any of these resonate with you, you can then have those conversations because you're like, oh, I saw that in that webinar that I was at with Questus, and I want to know more about it. So knowledge is power here. And I just think with estate planning in particular, it can feel really complicated. And in some ways it is. But as long as we kind of know the general language, then we feel like a little more at ease talking about it or feeling like we can talk about it with professionals and just also with our family. I mean, let's be honest, this isn't the easiest conversation to have with ourselves, let alone other people. And especially if you're in a sandwich generation where you might have parents that you're having a hard time having that conversation with them. And then you also have children. And so you're kind of in the middle there. Very common in my coaching sessions. Okay, so next slide is going to be things you'll find in an estate plan. This is summarizing what we've talked about. So guidance, it's going to give guidance on where your assets will go upon your death, even if it's just beneficiary account updates. A will, a trust, all of the above, any of the above. Really, the idea is you want to make sure people know exactly what to do when they need to do it. On how your health decisions will be made upon becoming incapacitated. We hope we don't become incapacitated, but the statistics I gave show that yes, it does happen. So having a roadmap of how people can navigate that on our behalf is going to be so helpful and such a gift for your family and loved ones. Guardianship and financial stability for minors or dependents. This is also part of estate planning and certainly a more complicated piece, but an important one for obvious reasons. And so you'll also find financial and durable POAs, as we discussed, the health and medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney. You don't necessarily need, you can have those documents I believe you can, it depends on the state, but outside of a trust. But usually if you do a trust, it's like part of it. But if you're just interested in those things, seek out that information to see if you can just get those if you're not ready for the whole thing, or you're just not sure what your options are. Good to have those conversations with people in your state. And then let's talk a little bit about what else we can find in an estate plan. This gets to what we can do today. So this is going to be a list of your assets, with or without title. So when I say that, I mean cars, yes, vehicles, yes, homes, yes, those have titles, but also assets that don't necessarily have title. As I mentioned, art, jewelry, furniture, instruments, anything you can think of that has value to you, but doesn't necessarily have a title to it. So you can put a list together of all of the assets and where you'd want that to go. You can put that can be, that's part of a will that we talked about, like that's part of that process, but also just having a list for your family to take a look at where your assets are, what they are, is invaluable, especially if something happens to you and you're incapacitated, because maybe they don't know how you're paying the mortgage every month. They don't know what bank accounts that's coming from. They don't know if it's on auto pay or not. These are the kinds of things that it's estate planning in the sense that you're preparing for the what ifs. And that's the beginning of estate planning. It doesn't have to be something super fancy. It can be the very basic day-to-days to make sure your family is taken care of and that you are empowering them to be able to make the best financial decisions that they can. So you can have a list of your accounts, account numbers, routing numbers, signatories on bank accounts, beneficiaries, social security numbers, login details. If one of you in the family is the person that does all the banking, all the investing, all the finances, make sure your partner knows what you're doing. Even if they don't want to be involved in the day-to-day, they should have a list that says, okay, if something happens, here's what you will need to do. Here's what's happening with our money. Because then they aren't on top of being completely overwhelmed with the emotional aspects of something happening to you. They're not also worrying about, okay, but now I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know where to go. I don't even know what accounts we have. So that's a really good place to start, and you can do it today. I love that about it. Doesn't take a whole lot of, well, it does take a lot of effort, but it doesn't take a whole lot of money, like no money, and it doesn't take a lot of kind of like thinking and thought and time. It just takes the time to look at what accounts you have and what spending you're doing out of each. On the same token, I would also say write down your credit cards, your debts, and your loans, just so that's also all in the same place. Okay. So what happens to debt when I pass away? This is definitely, this is very general information because it's going to depend very much on your debt and your situation. I just want you to know that you may, they may become liabilities of your estate depending on the debt. I want you to have this information because I don't think people really know this. And again, it depends on the kind of debt, it depends on the state. Definitely, again, talk to an attorney about what this looks like for you. But I want everyone to know that there is potential for your debts to become liabilities of your estate. And that would mean that, like, upon your passing, if you have all these assets here and you have these debts here and you have, like, some of them don't go away, then the estate has to pay those off before the estate gets dispersed. Now, again, this isn't all debts, and this is something to look into for your situation, but it is something I wanted everyone to know about. Okay. Next is, when should I make changes to beneficiaries on an account or in a trust, or when should I redo a will? So I mentioned looking at beneficiaries and making sure they're accurate every 6 months or so, maybe even quarterly. It just depends on what works well for you. But I also think that anytime there's a change in family relations, like a divorce, an illness, death, marriage, new child, those are just some examples. But anytime there's a change there, it's good to take a look at your beneficiaries and to take a look at your estate documents. If there's a change in your economic situation, like the value of the estate has changed, you maybe got an inheritance or someone got an inheritance, there was a large raise, retirement, marriage. These are all examples. Again, a change in your economic situation can be the impetus to take a look at your beneficiaries and also to reevaluate your estate plan itself and say, do I want to do something different? Adding assets. So if you buy a property, that's a really good example, or you move to a new state. So trusts are state specific. That's not to say you have to redo it every time you move necessarily. That's a question to ask your attorney when you decide to move. But I definitely think that anything that changes your assets or adding to them or removing them can warrant taking a look at your beneficiaries and your estate plan. Okay, life insurance. So is life insurance part of an estate plan? And what about retirement accounts? So we did talk a little bit about retirement accounts and beneficiaries, so I'm not going to cover that too much. But yes and yes is the answer. So when I think about estate planning, I do think about taking care of my loved ones when I'm gone. And part of that is life insurance. It can also be disability insurance for if you are here but you're incapacitated. It can look like a lot of different things, and everyone has their own risk tolerance and also kind of risk aversion. So when I have conversations about life insurance, and I wish it were more often, to be honest, because I think it's really important. But when I do have these topics, I find that most people really they feel like they're okay, they have enough, but we don't really know what enough is, and we don't necessarily have an idea of how to gauge that. So I think if you have life insurance, even if it's just through your employer, that's a great start. It can maybe be enough for you. If you're not sure, you can talk to a financial coach because we're not selling you anything. So if you want to evaluate if you have enough, if you feel like, is this the right kind of policy, or am I missing something? You can have those conversations with agents, but they are also in the business of making money on insurance. So maybe have those conversations and then bring that back to a coach and say, okay, this is the info I got. Like, I need some help deciphering what I've just been told. That is something I would love to be doing more of. I think it's something we all know we should probably be thinking about, and I'm hoping as part of this workshop or webinar that you are starting to think about that and say, okay, I probably need to have that conversation. Okay, so I think that actually covers everything I wanted to say for this because we did talk about retirement a little bit. But I'll just say this. If someone relies on your income or your potential income or your ability to save, including retirement savings, um, you should consider life insurance and potentially disability insurance. There's also long-term care insurance, which is something that I'm also happy to talk about with people. Um, Again, it's just something to think about your situation. You're obviously all here because you care about estate planning and you want to do what is best for your loved ones. So I think that conversation can really start with beneficiaries on accounts and life insurance. It's a really good place to start. Okay, so how else can I protect myself and my family now and after I'm gone? And that's you after this webinar. That's a slide. That's what the slide says, but yes, there it is. So, so the next slide gives you a little bit of action items. I think we've talked about them, but I wanted to put them all in one slide. So create a need to know file. This is probably like the least fun thing that you could be doing this holiday season, but it's really, really important. So I urge all of you to put this on your list of things to do by the end of the year because you want to go into 2025 with a fresh start. You want to feel empowered. And one of the things that will really help you feel empowered is going to be having this file, not just for yourself, but for your family. And your family should do the same. I mean, it could be like a fun day you spend together, get some coffee going, I don't know, bake some cookies. These painful things are made easier with like small perks, right? So get yourself in a comfortable place and put yourself in the zone and create a need to know file. So this is where you're going to have your usernames, your passwords, and your PINs. You're going to have your credit cards, the numbers, the debit card PINs, anything that someone might need if something happened to you tomorrow and you weren't able to do the financial things you need to do. Financial statements. So this could look like, you've got your retirement account, it generates every quarter, let's say. You have a copy of that because that's going to have the account number. It's going to have, if there's a financial advisor relating to it, it's going to have their contact info. You want to give as much information as possible in this file so people don't have to think too hard about what they need to do. So financial statements, that can include insurance, annuities, retirement plans, anything at all that you have that shows information about your accounts. Location of vehicle titles. So you'll want to say, I have 3 different vehicles, I have 3 different titles, they're in this car, this car, this car, or wherever you keep your titles. You want to just have a list of that so people can find it. That's the same for deeds, mortgage documents, past tax returns and records. You also want to have contact info for your financial and healthcare professionals, and statements have that sometimes, but you could also just put together a list of names, emails, phone numbers, etc. Copies of your, no, I didn't say that one yet. Copies of your healthcare and financial power of attorney forms. Those are if you have power of attorneys for those purposes. You want to make sure you have copies of those. You also want to make sure that the people who are listed as the power of attorneys know that they are, so that they know in the case of something happening to you, what to do, where to go, and that they should be prepared for that. So it's a conversation to have with those people in advance. Copies of life insurance policies, also super important. Copies of any contracts you've already made. Contracts that can be, I don't know, you're building a shed in your backyard, you haven't really started yet, but you have a contract, things like that that people might need to know. And loan documents, if you have any loans, should be in the file. Okay. I didn't list this here, but also you should have the beneficiaries of your accounts here too. Not necessarily. Now, if you have all of the information about your bank accounts, your investment accounts, your retirement accounts, and you have the statements there, then your family or loved ones or successor trustees or executors, whoever is going to need that, will be able to go from there to figure out who the beneficiaries are. But you can also list them if you're comfortable doing that. That is just kind of skipping a step and makes it a little bit easier for people to know what the intention was. Just want to make sure that matches what's actually at the banks. Okay, so the next slide is a shameless plug for coaching. So need some help getting financially organized? Well, I happen to know a person. So if you are needing some help getting financially organized, we have a whole team of coaches, not just me, that are here to help you with whatever that looks like for you. It can be relating to estate planning, insurance. It can be relating to spending plan. Maybe you're still at the point where you're like, I'm still spending more than I make. I don't like that. Or I don't actually know how much I'm spending. We can start there. We can start anywhere on the journey that you're at. So if you're interested in having a session with a coach, they are free, they are unlimited. You can go to questus.co/coaches and you can book your session anytime. And we can help you begin the process of getting organized. Okay, that's all I have. I do think I have some questions. So let me take a look at, oh, someone wants the recording. So I think Bryant can help with that.
No problem.
Awesome. So I think the way that works is it gets loaded a few days after. I think we have a YouTube channel, and then does it also get loaded into the Questus platform and they can just search for estate planning?
That's correct. Yeah, it'll you can search it on our Questus YouTube channel, or it'll definitely be in the platform in the next few days.
Okay. Thanks, Bryant. Cool. So, oh, was that a question? Nope. Okay. So I didn't get a lot of questions, but that's okay. We ended a little early. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay on. I can accept questions by chat, by Q&A. Again, it can be anonymous if you'd like through Q&A. Chat, everyone will see. And if you have any questions on anything we talked about, I'd love to hear them. If I can answer them, I will. If not, I'll try to get back to you. I'll get your email and get back to you. And again, I really appreciate everyone making it today to have this really important conversation. And I look forward to furthering the conversation with some of you. Thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate you.